Hello and welcome to Practical Ideas for Growth. We have a little bit of a shakeup today. We're actually going to put Sarah Dobek into the limelight here as our subject matter expert today. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
We got a really exciting topic today, something I know both of us love to do and love to talk about, which is buyer personas, but it's not how to build one. So we all know that accounting firms are selling differently these days, and coupled with the profession-wide staffing shortage, firms are becoming laser focused on their core services, expertise, and capacity to ensure they're devoting the right time to get those right clients into their firms. However, oftentimes that buyer qualification process doesn't always align with their ideal clients, if they even know who those are. And without that insight, we know that it's impossible to create a proven successful strategy that'll result in more of those really sweet clients that every firm wants. So for those who are listening, we really hope that you already have buyer personas established. And if you don't, go ahead and check out our website at innovatus.com to learn more about how you can go deeper to uncover your ideal clients and buyers. We'll also include that link when we repost and replay this video. So assuming that you already have your buyer personas, we're going to go straight into understanding how your buyer personas support your sales efforts, where that fits into the sales cycle. So real quick, I know we said if you need to learn more about buyer personas, go to the website. But Sarah, what is a buyer persona and why is it valuable in 10 seconds?
Yeah, I don't know if you can. I don't know if you can go and give me some information, but I'll do my best. So, I think one of the reasons that buyer personas become really valuable is not just because of the outcome of what we can do with that information, but the process itself of really articulating who are our buyers is something that most accounting firms very rarely go through. We all have individual experiences with our clients and referral sources. And what tends to happen over time is those books evolve quite a bit. And the types of clients that we're working with evolve quite a bit. And if you were to talk to every person in the firm, they would probably define it a little bit differently. But when we take a step back and look at accounting firms, in particular, they have attributes and traits among their buyers. And there's lots of different ways that you can describe. There's demographics, there's psychographics, but then there's also this new concept that we talk about, and our friend David Allison talks about, which is value graphics, which is the values people hold. And the buyer personas is a combination of all of those things that allow you to be able to describe what our buyers are. And for years and years, decades, accounting firms have talked about ideal client market as if there's one ideal, and there's really not a single ideal, but there are a set of attributes that define our buyers and the ones that work best with the services that you are positioned to support and the types of clients that you like working with the most. And so when we develop these buyer personas, it goes much deeper than how big is the client and what industry are they in. It really goes deep into defining a lot more of those attributes that really make a difference between the clients you really love serving and the clients you just kind of like serving at the end of the day.
You're absolutely right. And it all goes back to that word value. You started with valuable, and it's all about value. So now that we kind of have a good understanding of, what a buyer persona is, we could talk about this for hours, obviously. How do you use a buyer persona in the sales cycle? What phase of the sales funnel do they come in? A lot of our buyer personas typically inform marketing strategies, but we forget that it has to carry over from the strategy, and you still have all that detailed golden values to use in the sales cycle. So walk me through where that fits in.
So a lot of times it fits in both marketing and sales, because the two have an integrated buying process, which is really the funnel that I think you're referring to, right? There's the sales process, but there's also the buying process. And most things that we align is really around how people purchase various accounting firm services. And, for most buyers, there's a lot of research that's done on the front end, and on the marketing side, understanding what that process looks like and how it fits into the buyers you're trying to reach, what matters to them, what they value, even the tone of the communication, how they can communicate to you, how they enter into the actual buying process. Where they reach out to a firm and they would quote unquote enter the sales process for your firm, all has to do with those buyer profiles. If you're dealing with a younger set of buyers, right? And they're very much technology advanced, and they like to be able to reach out and schedule an appointment when they can, as opposed to trying to get you on the phone between 9 and 5. That's a very distinct profile, right? If they value responsiveness and accessibility to information and other factors, right? You're going to speak to them, you're going to talk to them, whether you're in a marketing or a sales process, whether we've got marketing materials or whatever around those things they value, versus if we're talking to, somebody that values different things, right? Face-to-face communication, for example, and has another set of attributes, that whole approach might look different, right? And how we use that in the sales process. We're going to meet with that person face to face versus somebody that has a different set of values. Zoom might be okay versus like driving out, sitting in their home or sitting in their office or sitting in their business might look a little bit different. And that's just a small way to do it, but a lot of it comes down to how we position things, how we talk about our services, what we highlight. And all of that goes back to the information that is informing these buyer personas. A big piece of that being values that they hold that are important to them, right? If loyalty, if credibility are important to them, how they define that, what that looks like, how that flows into what they're doing should inform every aspect of how you talk about what you do, how you highlight it, how you approach the entire sales process with those people.
You raise a really good point, and I mentioned and you reiterated that it's a great marketing strategy. It's usually where it starts, but I think what a lot of times happens is marketing isn't always out there talking to those clients. They're not one-to-one as much as the business developers and even the partners are. So one of the things we talk about, how do buyer personas support the sales cycle? Can you talk a little bit about that two-way street and that alignment between marketing and business development, and how marketing can do the research, but there's so much that needs to come back into marketing?
Yeah. Well, part of the research really is, to be honest, it's to talking to the people that speak to the clients, whether that's your partner, whether you have salespeople on your teams that are in these calls. They all hear different things, and everybody has a different gift of kind of sitting with the client and understanding what some of that is. And so part of the research process isn't just marketing going solo on it. I mean, there's an element where they should ideally be talking to some of these buyers that represent the clients and understanding from their perspective what's important. But there's also the piece of it that's, what's the side of the stakeholder and what are they hearing and how do they translate that? Because sometimes what the client says or the buyer says is oftentimes a little bit different than what that actually means. They can't always articulate it in the same way that our professionals can. And so this has to be a very collaborative, open process, and nobody's necessarily right or wrong. But I think anytime you sit on the sales side of something, you hear things repeatedly from your clients. If you're listening really well and you're asking the right questions, you tend to see patterns in what's there. And when you can step back and look at those patterns, that's really what creating some buyer personas is. Where are the patterns and the themes, right? We don't want to be so granular that we have 50 buyer personas, right? But we also don't have one. There's a fine balance within there. And with most of the practice groups and segments and areas of firms that we work with, there's usually a couple, 2 to 3, that will typically surface and populate to the top. But it's not usually going to be more than that. And some of it has to do with those differences in values around attributes, right? You've got people that really value consultative advice and tend to purchase a lot of services across the firm. And, there's certain things that they value. And then you've got the people that are usually purchasing compliance services. And depending on the size of their organization, credibility is a big value that they may tend to hold, right? And so they may select firms based on industry expertise and a few other factors, the reputation of the firm and the quality of their work. And those are typical things that we might see, right? And how we translate some of those. And so knowing which bucket allows you to really push and pull the language that's important to those people and, not be salesy, but really just speak to them about the things that are important to them and the things that they value. And when you can start to do that, you can connect with people in a very deep way around some of this. And that's where we see the rubber meet the road on the side of sales, right? And how this becomes value, right? And the precursor of that is, everything marketing does to message some of those things
Right.
on the front end of that.
So we often talk about the sales cycle, and a lot of times people will forget that the sales cycle doesn't end when you sign that engagement letter. It continues through. So tell me more about that intersection once you've gotten that ideal buyer into your firm. How do those buyer personas support that? How do they support cross-selling? How do they support the client experience and the service delivery?
Yeah, well, I think a couple things, right? For us at Innovatus, our philosophy on brand strategy is that it is built around the firm's core values, and but not only their core values, but the values of their clients, right? And where those two things intersect. Because in order for a brand to be a brand, you have to be able to live up to that brand, and we call it a brand promise, right? So I'll leave our brand strategy comments there. Another topic for another day. But when we think about client service, we think about how can we live up to that promise that we're making, and what is that expectation that we're setting? Well, the client is always coming in with an expectation. Whether we know that expectation or not is a whole nother ballgame, but we often don't have the conversation. But when we start to understand what they value, we can start to unfold that expectation, whether they can articulate it or not. If we know they hold certain values and certain things are important to them as part of this profile, we can get pretty close to saying, here's the things that are important. If responsiveness is important, well, maybe we put it on a team member that has a high level of urgency, and that is a natural part of who they are, and they're gifted. If they value that credibility piece and that technical accuracy, maybe the people that we assign to their team, are part of our quality control group, or people that can speak the language that the client really values and matters. And we don't often take the time to sort of think about that. But the other piece of this is, right, if we're attracting the right clients, we shouldn't have to bifurcate it that much. The larger the firm gets, the more important this becomes. But if we're attracting the right clients using these buyer personas, then we should be able to live up to that client experience. But it can also mold that experience and mold what's important and how we communicate with the client, depending on what's in here, or use as a starting off point to validate some of the things that we might believe to be true. And asking the client, how would you like us to communicate to us? And, what is important to you? And I know that we don't really take the time very often to do that when we onboard clients, from my experience. Just not enough time in the day is usually here.
Man, you've really queued us up or teed us up to take this home, which is, look, we can't go on another conversation without mentioning the rapid pace of change in the accounting profession. So buyer personas, yes, there are a core set of values that humans, that professionals, value. However, that changes. And this is a never-ending cycle, right? So what can firm professionals learn from the buyer persona, intersecting that with the sales cycle? And how does that kind of just create this recurring process?
Not quite sure how to answer that question other than to say that it is dynamic, and it will always be dynamic. Look, I think one of the things that firms have learned in the last couple of years with the staffing shortages and capacity challenges that they are facing is that many firms culled clients last year, in the process of culling clients, and they're looking at that going that, yeah, it's cool and it's easy to cut the non-profitable clients, or the clients that just aren't paying them, or, there's some easy decisions, some low-hanging fruit. And a lot of firms started there. The next phase that we're seeing now is a lot of clients are then now taking a harder look at, they're still profitable, but they're still not a right fit for us. Because at the end of the day, we can't grow unless we make room to grow. And unfortunately, sometimes that means that we can't serve the same client. Even if they're a good client, maybe they're not the right fit anymore, right? And a lot of firms are facing that conversation. And interestingly enough, this process is helping them articulate what they really want to be serving, and getting to an ability where they can agree on some of those attributes as a firm, because there are so many different opinions and preferences in public accounting. And because the work that public accounts do is so personal that we have to have some sort of direction, right? And so these are becoming a filter for a lot of clients to be able to help make those decisions. And that is the part that is what you refer to as sort of cyclical, right? And I can't even say that word today, but that's the part that is always evolving. And I think as a firm evolves, the answer to that, what is a right fit, what are good attributes, changes, because as the firm changes, the environment changes, and all of that's gonna go through an evolution, and this profession is going through a massive evolution right now in lots of different ways. This is just one tiny way.
Yeah, I think as we're getting ready to wrap up, you talk about values a lot, and I think we've heard value a lot of times because it's so important in this process, right? And I want to tie it back when we talk about the sales cycle. That value is so important. Accounting has become such a relational service. It's become such a relational business. We hear it all the time. And when you do buyer personas, what do you value as an individual? Because they're making decisions on who they are, not as necessarily a CFO. Yeah, they're going to think about revenue and supply chain or whatever else as a qualifier, but people have buying habits and there's certain values that they look at. There goes that word value again. So as we close up, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I would say that I would just reiterate that I agree with you. The profession's always been relational, and it will always continue to be relational, and that will never change. I think regardless of what happens with technology and consolidation and everything else, it will always be a relational business because it's a people business at the end of the day. So, I'm excited that we got to talk about this. I know we always wish we had more time, but Christian, thanks for turning the tables on me today.
Yeah, Sarah, this was great. I can't wait to keep talking about values, in future episodes. So if you haven't checked out our blog, make sure you go there. You get a really good feel for how to build a good buyer persona. But thank you again, Sarah. And we look forward to seeing you or having you listen to our next Practical Ideas for Growth.